moments in life that quietly or suddenly change everything. A diagnosis, a loss, a decision you didn't expect to make. And once that moment happens, the real question becomes, then what? Welcome to Change Happened, Then What? A storytelling podcast about the moments that shape us and the lives we build after them. Each episode brings you a real story told with honesty and care, where everything was questioned and where even then they chose to keep moving forward. This isn't an interview show. It's a place for real stories shared thoughtfully, sometimes messy, sometimes hopeful, but always human. I'm your host, Heather Holt, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin, I want to invite you into something I'm doing called the Changed Me Community Drawing. Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out how you can enter into our monthly drawing for a super cozy Change Happened trucker hat or a super soft tee. Now, let's dive in. Is it like to love someone so much you have to let them go? At the very core of who Lisa is, there are values her parents quietly planted in her long before she understood their significance. Resilience, service, and second chances. But becoming the woman who would fully embody those values was not a straight path. Because, like so many of us, Lisa had to spend years figuring out who she was before she could finally recognize who she had always been meant to be. Lisa is someone who feels less like a guest on this show and more like a kindred spirit. Because the more we talked, the more I realized how strangely parallel our lives had been. Both of us felt like only children in ways that are hard to explain, even though technically neither one of us were. Both of us found ourselves immersed in music from the earliest chapters of our lives. She was a trombone player. I was a flute player. Both of us navigated a divorce. Both of us eventually found our way back to the one who got away. And both of us built lives rooted in helping others, just in different ways. Lisa is a mother to kids and cats, a wife, a musician, and the creator of the Positively Productive System. But before Lisa would build a life helping others avoid burnout, life would ask her to survive grief, caregiving, loss, and the kind of overwhelm that nearly buried her. This is Lisa Zawrotny's story.
So I was adopted, and my parents had a lot of foster children. So I was an only child a lot of the time, but not always. And I would often be the youngest because they would bring in older kids temporarily, and then they would move on, and I would be on my own. So it was a really interesting mix in my childhood of having people in our home. We had people coming and going. You know, my parents taught me about caring for others and about taking people under your wing and looking out for those who needed a space. And that really stuck with me. It's a connection that I made early on with my parents. And I think it's because of how we started with them adopting me and then still caring for other kids. I'm so impressed by what they had done and how giving they were, because I think about trying to do something like that today, and I don't know if I'm cut out for it in the same way, but I found other ways to serve.
Lisa grew up in a home where service was not just spoken about, it was modeled. But even in a house full of people, she often found herself feeling alone.
I had those times sitting there listening to AM radio. My husband still picks on me because, like AM Gold, I know so many lyrics to so many songs. He's like, how do you know that song? I sat there by myself playing with Barbies and listening to AM Gold on repeat.
835.
For those of you too young to remember the AM/FM dial, Lisa and I come from a time when listening to music meant patience. You called radio stations to request a song and hoped they'd play it. You waited through commercials and songs you did not love to hear just to get to the one you did. And you listened to every track all the way through because there was no skip button. AM radio was often home to talk radio, oldies, easy listening, and the classics that shaped a generation. For Lisa, those quiet hours with music became more than background noise. They were her comfort, her companionship, part of her identity.
I started early with a love for music that I'm grateful that my parents fostered in me. They spotted it right away. They couldn't get me off this tiny little organ that they had. I was sitting outside on a picnic table strumming a badminton racket and singing at the top of my lungs like, it was a guitar, and I was performing, and they were like, oh, she's musical, like something's going on here. So they, at an early age, they got me a piano and piano lessons, and very soon thereafter, I became a member of the concert band in my school, and I started playing trombone. Not well, not well at all. Really quite terribly to begin with, but a lesson in resilience and a lesson in starting questionably, but having the passion for it and trusting the process. When I picked up the trombone, I'm like trying to play the mouthpiece. The first thing we had to do is Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I'm barely getting a sound out of there. But by the time I graduated, I was in charge of all of them, and I was in the stage band, and I had a lot of accolades, a lot of musical awards. I went to all-county, area all-state, conference all-state. And so I was first chair trombone in my high school, and I had so much fun. I was in basically every musical group that I could possibly be in.
That idea of resilience through music struck me deeply because I never thought of band that way until she said it. I started on the trumpet before finding my way to the flute and piccolo. And like Lisa, it did not come naturally to me at first. But I loved it, and I kept going. I played in all states, regionals, concert band, marching band, and eventually served as the drum major while holding first chair in concert band. Neither of us knew it then, but while we were practicing scales, standing nervously up in front of judges, we were learning something much bigger than music. We were learning how to keep going when something matters to you. And that lesson would serve us both later in life.
Fun fact, not only was I doing music connected through the school, my piano teacher got me involved in handbells. So I played in a handbell choir, but the most interesting kind of musical side quest, if you will, was that the Lions Club had a youth band that they would have play at their conventions every year. And it was an incredible experience. You meet kids from, all over the state. You're going to different locations in the state. I made some lifelong friends.
That fun fact matters more than it seems, because her senior year in that traveling band would come back into the story later. Sometimes life plants details early that do not make sense until much later in life. We'll be right back to Lisa's story. Today's Change Happen story is sponsored by Pure Energy Apothecary. Owner Don Lancaster and I are friends, and honestly, that matters. It's how I know how much care goes into what she makes. Dawn doesn't create products just to sell them. She makes them because she uses them and cares about how they support real people like you. Her magnesium butter has become a staple in my daily life when my muscles feel tired, when my legs won't settle at night, or when my nervous system feels like it's been running on overdrive, which, let's be honest, a lot of us can relate to. Magnesium supports muscle relaxation, helps with sleep, and eases that wired but tired feeling. This butter is creamy and absorbs right into the skin. No heaviness, no overpowering scent, just comfort. For me, it's not just relief. It's a small ritual that tells my body it's safe to slow down. If you're craving that kind of support, visit pureenergyvt.com and use code PURECHANGE to get your 20% off. Now, back to Lisa's story.
For me, music was my love and my passion. It was where I went to get away from everything else. So people expected me to go to school for music, to go to college for music. And my response was, no, I don't want the thing that I love this much to become my job. So with that, I was like, I'm going to find something else to do. And boy, did I struggle to find something else to do. I did the classic college quest of, well, what do I do? I grew up in a family business, and so my parents were not only caregivers of others in service to the community in all kinds of groups. They influenced me in terms of how I saw the world and how I needed to be in service to it. I learned that from them, but what I didn't learn is how to figure out what I wanted to do next. And so, as I said, I did go off to college, and I went to get a business degree because, I don't know, I was with a family who had their own business, and that seemed like a good idea at the time. And I did the classic struggle of not knowing what to do and not feeling like it wasn't right for me, but not knowing why.
There's something deeply relatable about that season of life. The age when everyone asks what you want to do forever before you've even figured out who you are. Sometimes the truth is we make decisions before we fully understand why. And maybe that's part of our becoming, part of our learning to choose before certainty arrives.
College was a completely different world for me. Thankfully, I went to a really awesome school that wasn't too large, and it was small enough to help me get my feet on the ground and to figure out what I wanted to do with proper guidance. So I changed my major a bunch of times. During this entire time, my dad is very sick, and I end up helping my mom care for him. So I was managing being in college, floundering, not being sure what I wanted to do with my life or how to get there, and then also really being afraid that I was going to lose my dad. I think it was always in the back of my mind that we didn't have much time left, and that really informed me in terms of the next decisions that I would make in my life.
Fear has a quiet way of shaping our decisions. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it's just the small ways we choose closeness over opportunity, family over ambition, presence over possibility. Lisa earned her degree in English, found herself drawn to libraries, and considered what that path might look like. But the opportunities available would move her far from home, at a time when staying close mattered to her more than anything.
At this time, putting out resume after resume after resume with this brand new degree, the ink had barely dried on my degree, and I'm trying to get a job in an industry that didn't have a lot of turnover. And I wasn't having any luck, but I could have if I had wanted to move to a different state. Like, I'm in New York at the time, and I might have had an opportunity if I got into a library in Texas, let's say. But for me, then the next life lesson comes along, which is, well, we have things that we want, and then we have other things that we want. What do we want more? And for me, I wanted to be around my family and around my dad, in thinking, I don't know how much time I have with him. And so I was like, well, then I need to figure out something else to do. And I got a temp job, and I did administrative work. And, as a secretary, I put myself through grad school, working in the dean's office, and, as a secretary in a real estate office. And I had a lot of different ways to make income, and I continued to do that, thinking maybe there's a way that I can pivot into some kind of English degree related field.
So she stayed. And sometimes staying has its own kind of courage. Lisa would take a temp job and administrative jobs, remaining close to family, continuing her education, and eventually became her father's primary caregiver until she was 27, when she learned one of the hardest lessons.
I was taught in that moment what it's like to love someone enough to let them go. And I was taught that at 27.
That really stayed with me because I was 27 when I lost my brother. And there's something about losing someone at that age that changes the architecture of your heart. It was another strange thread between Lisa and I, another reminder that sometimes we recognize people because they've survived something similar.
It teaches us something so different. It changes our perspective on the world. And then I think when we reach out to other people in the world, we reach out with a different kind of empathy. We understand, oh, that stayed with you. And it informs so much of what you do and who you are. You are such a gentle soul. And I know that was a contributing factor to it.
I think some people find each other because they speak the same emotional language, not because their stories are identical, but because their pain taught them the same kind of tenderness. And then Lisa would learn the lesson of second chances.
I had been dating someone in college, broke up with him, and then gave him a second chance, which is it's so funny, such a big part of my life. But I do love second chances. And I think if I'm being really honest with myself, down deep, where you don't tend to think about these things, or you don't want to think about these things, so you bury them deeply, I think that I might have waited longer to make a choice like marrying someone if my dad had been healthier. I chose to be married, and he was a good friend and a good man, but the way that I describe it is that he just wasn't right for me. And interestingly, it opened up the doors, if you will, in my life for another second chance, which is that young man that I met at the Lions Club Youth Band.
That young man from the traveling band, the fun fact, the one she met all those years ago, the one she fell so hard for back then, he would eventually become part of her story again. And if you ever found your way back to the person who once felt like home, there's something so sacred about timing. Sometimes love doesn't work because it's wrong. Sometimes it just doesn't work because it's too early. But even in finding love again, life was not done asking Lisa to lean in on the resilience she built so young.
The next chapter where we moved her in, and it's like my origin story for how I became the person I am today, how I became the coach and the podcaster. All of those things come from living that life that, I thought the other caregiving in my life and the other points of service were difficult. Being the sole child to care for someone who is losing herself bit by bit while you're pregnant and have two very little children. So it was a sandwich caregiver situation. That's, to this day, the hardest thing I've ever done.
There are few heartbreaks more painful than watching someone you love disappear while they're still here. Alzheimer's disease slowly steals your memory, identity, and the familiar pieces of a person long before their body leaves this earth. And for caregivers, the grief starts long before the final goodbye.
I was lucky in one respect that I never had her say to me, "Who are you?" That some people who have had to care for those with dementia and Alzheimer's have had that experience. However, I could tell of her uncertainty as to who we were and her reluctance, if you will, to say names and identify people, but she was friendly to us until the end.
That's no small thing, because for so many families, that moment does come. That moment when the person you love looks at you with unfamiliar eyes. And I remember asking my grandmother once if she knew who I was. And when she answered, "Heather Mary, of course," it felt like being handed a gift I did not even know I needed. And for Lisa to be spared that particular heartbreak with her mother, that mattered to me. And it mattered to her. But even so, love does not make caregiving easy. And eventually, for the safety of her own children, Lisa had to make the excruciating decision to place her mother in a nursing home, a decision no loving child ever makes lightly.
My mom, she taught me to be in service to others. She taught me to be a caregiver. I'm torn because part of how I am rewriting my generation is to say, okay, yes, however, maybe we find a way to do this that isn't to our own detriment. That's the big lesson that I learned. She said, you know, when you're family and you love each other, you don't put you don't put the person you love in a nursing home. You take care of them. You know, she sort of had demands of me, there were expectations of me that I learned through her. So given that, it was exhausting on so many different levels. And sometimes I forget how exhausting it was, because you figure on the most basic level, keeping everybody alive and fed, and also trying to thrive too. I can certainly say that creating my ongoing book of empathy, there's a huge chapter, a huge one on caregiving, because survival mode is no joke. And I still can't believe that I got through it. Sometimes I tell the story and I'm like, that was me.
And somewhere in the aftermath of it all, Lisa looked back at who she had been in those years and thought, that was me? Not in disbelief, but in awe. Because sometimes survival mode carries us further than we realize until we finally stop long enough to look back. After her mother passed, Lisa found herself buried beneath grief, logistics, motherhood, marriage, and total overwhelm, trying to hold everything together, trying to be everything for everyone. And eventually, she asks herself the question that would change the course of her life. Does all of this really need to be so hard?
All those lessons are what I use to coach now, you know, about like what really matters. Well, there's a lot of stuff when push comes to shove, when you're in a traumatic situation where you're like, oh yeah, I thought that mattered, but it really didn't. So I think we can learn so much from that. And that drives me forward every single day to say, maybe if I keep sharing this, other people don't have to go through it like I did. Now, they might still be in survival mode. They might still have to care for others, but maybe, just maybe, if they hear what I have to say, they will take care of themselves better than I did, and they won't have that guilt that I had, thinking if I, if I try to get out of the survival mode and take care of myself, if I stop caring for her directly, have I failed? If I could go back and change anything, it would have been taking better care of me. And this is what drives me now, to be a caregiver advocate, to be a self-care advocate. And so I kept walking the path, holding space for people who felt that overwhelm in their lives. And I kept learning more and more. Like I told you before, I reverse engineered why this happened, why I was struggling, had so much and was trying to clean out so much, and why it was working now, but it hadn't before. And I just kept studying and learning and getting certifications and going on that path where it's like, what if we use these lessons of being so overwhelmed, of being in that burnout and being in that survival mode, and we took those lessons, like the realization that it's all not as important as we think it is. It's all not as urgent as we think it is, because we know damn well that if we have to, there are certain things that can be dropped. Well, what if we just decided to drop them even when we aren't going through a lot? What if? It was a lot of what ifs. That's what brought me to this today, to now 10 years of my business of coaching people in this way, of helping them simplify and asking the right questions and giving themselves permission to just not do so much. And so in the context of all of this, all that we've learned and all that I do, the one word I want to bring up, and I think it's been threaded through the life lessons and the story that I've described, but I want to say it out loud, is compassion. That gentleness, that grace that we not only need to give each other, and it's beautiful to do so, but we very much need to give ourselves. And I think that the turning point for me, or in terms of why I do what I do in the way that I do it now, is that I needed compassion so much back then when I was so overwhelmed, and every resource that I had that was like how to be more productive and get organized and do the thing felt so overwhelming, and never taking into consideration everything I was going through.
Out of grief, burnout, and survival, Lisa created what is now known as the Positively Productive System, a framework designed to help people boost productivity, reduce overwhelm in sustainable, human-centered ways. She turned survival into strategy, pain into purpose, and the lessons life forced her to learn into something she could use to help others. For the past 10 years, Lisa has been coaching others through overwhelm, burnout, caregiving, and balance. She also hosts the Positively Living podcast, where she shares weekly tools and encouragement for people trying to create more peace and less pressure in their lives. And I can tell you personally, her work is not like most coaching you see online. It's honest, it's grounded, compassionate, and deeply practical. Before we wrapped up, I asked Lisa what makes her smile today.
How about today? Okay, coffee. Always my coffee in the morning. Okay. The sun makes me smile, laughing with my kids. The last thing that's put a huge smile on my face, and I wish that you could see it because it's right now in this moment, it's having a really good conversation with a kindred spirit.
Honestly, I think I can relate, and I would say the same things. And of course, I asked her to leave you with one final piece of wisdom.
Okay, how about I share a quote and a piece of wisdom? My favorite quote to end on is Sophia Bush's, "You're allowed to be a masterpiece and a work in progress simultaneously." You are going to be the both and, right? You're going to be the hot mess. You're going to be working on stuff, and also you're so incredible. I want you to give yourself grace. We live in a world that demands the impossible, especially caregivers, right? I mentioned this before. It demands the impossible from us and encourages us at every turn to doubt ourselves. And it's important that we appreciate every moment, every attempt that we make, that we embrace our imperfections, and we celebrate how we try, how we fail, how we try again, the resilience that we have, and that we honor who we are.
Maybe that's the thread running through Lisa's entire story, that grace and compassion are not just things we offer other people, but they are things we must learn to do for ourselves. Grace for the season when we are surviving more than thriving. Compassion for the versions of ourselves still trying to figure it out. Patience for the truth that healing and becoming rarely happen in a straight line. Lisa's life reminds us that resilience is not simply enduring hard things. It's allowing those hard things to shape you into someone wiser, softer, and more purposeful on the other side. So if today's story reminded you that you're still becoming, still healing, still both a masterpiece and a work in progress all at once, then maybe this is your reminder to offer yourself a little more grace this week. And if Lisa's story resonated with you, be sure to share this episode with someone who may need it, because sometimes the story that changed someone's life is the one they almost did not hear. You can check out the show notes for all the information on Lisa and how to connect with her. You can also visit changehappenedpodcast.com under Season 2 guests, and you'll find all of her links there as well. And now for the What Changed Me community drawing information. Head to changehappenedpodcast.com. Click on the What Changed Me banner to tell us what stayed with you from today's episode or any interview episode you listen to as part of the What Changed Me community drawing. Each time you share, you'll be entered into a Change Happened drawing. You can enter more than once. Every entry is also automatically included into our quarterly drawing for a special Change Happened Super Prize, whether you've won before or not. Change doesn't end the story. It's often where the next chapter begins. If something in today's episode stayed with you, a moment, a sentence, a feeling, I'd love to hear about it. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. Because these stories don't end where the episode does. They keep moving forward in what we carry with us and in who we pass them on to. Is written, edited, and produced by me, Heather Holt, with the loyal background support from my two sidekicks, Waylon and Dalton. Until next time, keep smiling and maybe let your dog inspire your next big idea.